Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Today I'm joined by Public Service Commissioner Johnson to talk about the energy portion of our affordability package. Our tax relief proposals to the legislature include things like exempting the tax on military pensions, reducing the Social Security tax burden, and expanding the child tax credit. We believe these will help us reverse the demographic trends we're seeing. And while tax reforms are important and helpful, they're not the only answer to addressing the challenges we're facing. We also need to make sure the systems we have in place that we can control don't hurt the very people we're trying to help. Now, one of the things we can't control are the tariffs coming out of Washington, especially the Canadian tariffs that went into effect last night, which will have significant impacts on Vermonters and Vermont businesses, at least in the foreseeable future. While it's important for us to monitor these actions and understand how they'll impact us, we can't let it consume us. As I've said before, we can't live in chaos over the next 4 years. And I'll continue to stand up for Vermont and the best interests of Vermonters on this journey. So in the meantime, it's important for us to stay focused on the issues that we can control, like housing, education, public safety, and affordability. One area that impacts our overall cost of living is how much households and businesses spend on utilities, like electric bills. And you might ask, why do we care about businesses? Well, for one thing, because they pass the cost of doing business on to us, their customers. That's one of the reasons I vetoed the renewable energy standard last year, because the ripple effect could raise costs on Vermonters significantly. And as you might remember, after an 18-month-long public engagement process led by PSD, we came to the table with a workable proposal, which would have achieved the same emissions reductions more affordably. Now, the rest is history. I vetoed the bill and it was overridden, which was unfortunate. But it's now more important than ever that we put that aside and prioritize policies that are affordable, especially as we continue to see the cost of living increase and as we continue to monitor federal action that could impact Vermont. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Johnson to talk about our legislative proposals that will reduce expected rate increases as a result of the renewable energy standard put into law last year. Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrick Johnson. As the Governor mentioned, I am Commissioner of the Department of Public Service. As the Governor mentioned, the impact of energy-related tariffs could be significant. That's especially true given that this is a time when energy costs are rising due to other reasons as well. It's more important than ever to ensure state policy doesn't add to Vermonters' energy burden and that we do more to reduce that burden. Even without tariffs, our team estimates Vermonters will see an 18% rise in electricity rates over the next 5 years. Again, this is without accounting for any tariff-driven costs. It is against this backdrop that we are proposing more affordable, achievable, sustainable, and ultimately faster climate action. Our omnibus proposal, H289, incorporates several essential changes, and I'm here today to speak specifically about changing to a better clean energy standard. First, moving to a clean energy standard, or CES, would reduce electricity costs for Vermonters without losing any emission reduction benefits. The issue here is carbon-free sources like nuclear and sometimes hydro not being considered renewable. 20% of our current electricity needs are met through nuclear energy, and the region is poised to explore new, much smaller units. It's a critical, reliable resource during months when the sun isn't shining much and the wind isn't blowing. But because these large carbon-free sources aren't included in the current Renewable Energy Standard, or RES, ratepayers have to pay for what are called renewable energy credits, or RECs. They come from other sources that are considered renewable to meet the RES requirement. Having a clean energy standard, as the governor has proposed, is projected to save at least $18 to $20 million over 15 years. Oh, excuse me, over 10 years. It's $15 to $20 million over 10 years, with the potential for much greater savings. It's an achievable measure that enables us to lower energy cost pressures without sacrificing emission reduction gains, and really it couldn't be more timely. I also want to highlight the bill's other cost containment mechanisms that will prevent Vermonters from having to pay more, or frankly overpaying, for in-state renewables by more effectively placing or lowering the cap on renewable energy standard costs. Current law requires utilities to procure more in-state renewables that can drive the need for incredibly expensive transmission and distribution system upgrades that cost ratepayers even more dollars. Our proposal seeks to avoid unnecessary construction of expensive transmission or distribution upgrades by encouraging development of new in-state renewable generation in areas of the grid best suited for that generation. When purchasing power from a new in-state generator would cause an unnecessarily expensive upgrade, we propose to enable the utility to instead procure larger scale renewable energy from anywhere in the region. This will lead to better in-state siting decisions and further open up things like more hydroelectricity and new offshore wind when it comes online. The second cost containment mechanism relates to what are called alternative compliance payments. Utilities are required to pay the alternative compliance payment if they cannot procure renewable power that meets their requirements less expensively. Right now, Vermont's ACP costs ratepayers nearly twice as much as other New England states, 7.4 cents per kilowatt hour in Vermont, versus 4 cents per kilowatt hour in the surrounding New England states. We propose lowering this alternative compliance payment for smaller in-state renewable generation to 4.3 cents per kilowatt hour. This would assure that Vermonters don't have to pay more than they should for renewable generation, but leaves intact the requirement for 100% clean energy. In sum, these proposals represent meaningful changes to reduce electricity cost pressures, even as we accelerate progress toward a brighter, cleaner, low-carbon energy future. Thank you, and with that, I'll turn it back to the governor.
Thanks very much. We'll now open up to questions.
Governor, the budget adjustment is expected to head to your desk later today. Do you continue to plan to veto it?
Yes. I think that will be a surprise to no one. I think I've let everyone know that. It doesn't meet what I see as what we need in Vermont right now. It spends more money than we should be spending. And as well, it furthers the hotel motel program, which I feel has been a failed system, and we can do better. So between those two, it deserves a veto.
Lawmakers didn't go for your proposal to, shift the motel program toward municipalities. Do you see room for negotiation there?
Well, I think it gives us a place to start, and I realize that it was somewhat last minute, and I don't think that everyone really understands the proposal we push forward in depth, because it gives a lot of flexibility to municipalities. Because this wasn't really about money, it was about the program itself, and no one understands the impact better than those communities. So the money, we increased it by $300,000, and these communities could use it for anything that they thought was necessary to deal with the impact, whether it's having hotel rooms for people, furthering emergency shelters, using it for public safety. It really is flexible in that regard. So it may be a starting point for further discussions, which I'm hopeful, because I do want a Budget Adjustment Act to move forward, but we need to work together on this.
Yeah, I mean, absent a veto override, what do you see as the potential path forward here?
Well, again, I think that was the starting point. Clear out for the rest of the spending. The 14 million we don't need to spend that now. We should be saving those dollars, especially with what we're seeing out of Washington, or the unknown out of Washington. So we should at least save that money until we discuss the big bill.
Going back to the original topic with page 289, we're obviously a week from crossover kind of part one bill this week and then appropriation money bills next week. I mean, are you hearing that lawmakers are planning to put any of those ideas into some bills? I mean, time's kind of running out when it comes to something that big at this point. So.
Yeah, I believe there is some forward motion, but I don't know in particular which body.
I think there are elements that have been discussed. We've been meeting with the chairs of the relevant committees in a collaborative fashion to try to identify what might serve as the makings of a compromise, if that's possible. It is a bit late. It took a while to get that actually introduced, but there's a walkthrough, as you mentioned, tomorrow, and so we're hopeful. In the end, I think both the Senate and the House and the Scott administration are bent on trying to find something that works. So it'll be considered. These ideas will be considered. The question is ultimately what's its fate.
So are there any specifics you can maybe give that when talking to, say, lawmakers, either party, that maybe some ideas that have piqued their interest or ones that you feel higher on that might be able to fit in a compromise?
Well, I think clearly the ideas that I just talked about would be part of that compromise. In addition, I think further focusing on weatherization, that should be important. In addition to that, I think coming up, there's several plans that don't have price tags, that don't have prioritization, that don't have a sense of timing. If we could clean that up and have one statewide climate action implementation plan with clear guidelines, with clear timing and clear price tags, that certainly the legislators we talk to, that's piqued their interest.
Governor, I want to ask about H2, which is also on the floor today with Raise the Age, something you spoke highly about over the last few months. Just talk to us about your thoughts on its current form as they're set to vote on it today.
I believe it's a 2-year extension, which isn't ideal, but it's palatable from my perspective. We'll see where it goes from here. And I'm not sure what else is attached to the bill, that if there's any poison pills there. But again, it has a long ways to go. But in terms of getting us through this, at least giving us a 2-year extension would be helpful. Anything you want to add, Jay?
We're nearing the halfway point of the legislative session. Can you offer your assessment of the work that's been done or hasn't been done thus far?
Obviously, we want to move forward with the education plan. I think we're seeing maybe some advancement in the Senate in particular. They seem to be moving quicker than the House. So we'll see what happens through crossover, but there's still a lot of time left. And again, as I said before, new legislators, many new legislators, new legislative leadership in some of the committees has led to maybe seeming as though it's a little bit slower, but I think it'll pick up, the pace will pick up after the crossover.
Sticking with education yesterday, Secretary Zoe Saunders was in Senate Education. I guess, did you watch or follow that vote at all, and any remarks heading into a full floor vote tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm very appreciative of the legislators on that committee, Democrats in particular, who were objective, open-minded, and moved that process forward. And I look forward to the confirmation in the Senate.
Governor or Carrick, does our in-state renewable industry reliance on Chinese-made solar panels and the likely enduring trade war that will be happening there, does that play at all into your thinking on more domestic production?
I know there are a number of Chinese solar panels that they're utilized in Vermont, but I don't know where else they're manufactured.
There's actually some American manufacturers of solar panels, but Guy, what I would say is we got the concerns about the cost for renewable energy in some of those programs way before the tariffs or consideration of Chinese panels. So that just, I think as the governor noted at the outset and as I emphasized, that's one of the reasons why these are modest proposals, but they should be easy to do.
Could you possibly circulate that to your speech, your remarks to the press? 'Cause
Absolutely.
that'd be great. Governor, I have a separate question, but it's also about tariffs. The New York Times reports that the Mexican government is rather effectively cracking down on fentanyl production in Mexico in response to tariff negotiations. And I'm wondering if our in-state police and public service, public safety, has noticed any increase in the cost of fentanyl or supply of fentanyl? Has it percolated up here yet?
I don't know if anyone's here from.
Dan Bates.
Dan, I don't know if you can answer that question or not. I personally, Guy, have not heard of any of price fluctuation in regards to fentanyl at this point in time, but maybe Dan has some information on that.
Yeah, Governor, thank you. I'd like to follow up more specifically with our intelligence folks to ask that question. I think we've seen some very nominal changes across the country in things like fentanyl purity, the overall purity. However, I can't tell you that that's specific to Vermont. I can tell you that we have not seen overwhelming or substantial changes, but I can definitely follow up and get back to you with more information.
I would love that. Thank you.
Governor, you currently have sole authority to deputize law enforcement for cooperation with federal immigration officials. It seems like there's some legislative interest in sort of shoring up your power to do so by restricting the ability of the president to declare a state of emergency and allow law enforcement to enter into those agreements. I mean, when would you think it was reasonable to deputize law enforcement for immigration purposes?
Once again, I think that where we're at in Vermont in terms of our immigration policies and some of the procedures that we utilize in law enforcement sets the right tone. And I'm not looking to do anything different at this point. We share the concerns of many. If there is a bad actor who's an illegal immigrant, we would help shepherd that person out of the system and out of the country. But if they're here peacefully working in our communities, then I don't see the need to focus on them. So we'll continue with the policies and procedures we're utilizing at this point.
All right, we'll switch over to the phones. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Hi, I was hearing this come up in some select board meetings I've been following. According to some, there's a road salt shortage statewide. I don't know. Is that, anybody know anything about that? I don't know. And is it an issue at this time of year? I don't.
Yeah, I'll ask Secretary Flynn to weigh in on this, but we have utilized more salt this year. We've had more snow, more weather. So I think we've increased our usage probably by 25%, maybe more. And so there is, and most of us in the Northeast are impacted in the same way, particularly New York, maybe more so than Vermont. So that has led to a bit of a shortage, but we're managing our stockpiles. There isn't any problem at this point that I know of, but Secretary Flynn, maybe you can weigh in.
Thank you, Governor. It is certainly a hot topic these days. As the governor said, VTrans itself, as of last week, we were running about 20,000 tons ahead of this time last year, which does represent about a 25% increase, as the governor mentioned. About a month ago, we were informed that salt trains from Watkins Glen area in New York, where Cargill has a mine, were being stopped because at that time, the state of New York was concerned about a very severe incoming storm through New York City and Long Island area. And what that did was it just interrupted some of the previously purchased salt from being delivered into Vermont. And there may have been individual communities that were part of that. However, the primary delivery service in Vermont, Bear Trucking Company, salt comes in by Vermont Rail Systems. I'm told recently that we're not aware of any issues. There was a couple of deliveries made for us on Monday prior to town meeting in 2 locations, one in Williamstown and one in Berlin. The rest of the AOT garages are in good shape, we think, for the rest of the winter. We, of course, refill our salt sheds before we calculate complete usage for a total season. We've yet to do that. I've also, of late, not heard of any communities in particular that are saying they're short, and this is just conversations that I've had through the supplier. A week and a half ago, we were informed by a company named Compass Minerals, which is based in the United States, but their mines are in Quebec, that they would not be shipping salt to VTrans along our northern tier because we sort of split up our supply. And that was because of the tariff. We asked the question, was that because you think we would pay the tariff, or was this potentially a punitive action? And before we could even get that question answered, the tariff threat had ended for that day, and those salt deliveries occurred. So wrapping up the state has, we believe, the salt we need to get through the winter, and we haven't heard of anything current with respect to local municipalities.
The only thing it might affect is our spring fill-ups, which we typically do. And that could be just because of the inventory at the mines. They crush the product and then deliver it to us. And I think they've gone through a lot of their stockpiles. So we'll see what happens at that point. But if we can get through the winter, we'll be in good shape.
Governor, I wondered...
I just one last point would say that the supplier and the delivery company have actually sought salt as far as Cleveland in the last month to make sure they keep coming into Vermont what's necessary, both for the state and for municipalities, and we appreciate that on their part. Thank you.
Governor, I wondered if Secretary Flynn knows whether the roads in I-91 in Rockingham last Saturday were being well taken care of, were well salted. There was a terrible double fatal accident down there, 30-40 car pileup. Were you able to look into the conditions and find out?
Again, I think that we had spoken shortly after that incident, unfortunate incident, with the loss of life of a young baby, as well as one of the parents. So obviously it was devastating. But from what I understand, it was a squall that came up. The roads were bare up until that point, and it was just a squall that lasted maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, not enough time for anyone to react. Secretary Flynn?
Thank you, Governor. The one thing I would add to that is one of the photographs, I believe it may have been from media, maybe it was a VTrans photograph, but in the parking lot, if you will, of vehicles that were stopped in that stretch, in the middle of that, you'll see a VTrans truck. So we were out, to the question, we were out, we had responded to this squall that had come through, and we were in the middle of the stoppage, which had been caused by the tragic crash that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Keith, did you have any other questions?
No, thank you, appreciate it.
All right, back to the room.
A couple of weeks ago, Governor asked you about the committee bill and House General on Housing that you said you were just made aware of like an hour before the press conference happened. That seems to be the vehicle for some kind of housing bill throughout this session. I was wondering with the new draft coming out yesterday if you've been keeping tabs on. I saw Commissioner Farrell somewhere earlier, I don't know if he's in here. But if he's not, I was wondering if you've been keeping tabs on the progress of that bill and just your thoughts so far.
Yeah, in terms of the housing piece, I think that is moving along. I'm much more concerned about Act 250 and some of the regulatory changes that need to be made, and that seems to be fairly slow in the House in particular. But we'll see where we, all we need is a bill to get through, and then things can be attached throughout the session. So it's not a time to panic at this point, but we want to see those regulatory changes as well as, and Act 250 changes as well, improvements.
Back to the budget adjustment for a moment. Are there programs that you're worried could run out of funding this spring if that bill isn't in place in a timely manner?
Again, we feel, and have asked our financial management and our Secretary of Administration this very question. We feel we can get through without it if we had to, but it would be less than ideal, and we would much prefer having a budget adjustment than not. So we're going to work towards trying to come up with some sort of a compromise where we get a clean bill that we can take care of some of the issues that we have, and then move forward and have these other conversations in the big bill.
And just one more question on that front. When you said earlier that you feel the hotel motel program has failed, can you just elaborate on that?
Well, again, if you look pre-pandemic, it was just a shadow of what we created. It was like a monster after that, and it's led to not being able to connect with people that are utilizing the program. Case in point, we've set up these family emergency shelters, and we've actually seen a lot of improvement. We've been able to interact with those in the program, found them employment, found them places to live, found out what their issues are so that we can help, the wraparound services that are available. So we just think that the warehousing people in a hotel or motel is counterintuitive to helping them get through it. It's really just putting them aside, and I think it's the wrong approach. And you know, I think the legislature, to their credit, realized this last year, and this is what we came up with. And I know it's not easy, but I think there's a better way of accomplishing this. And from my perspective, offering this proposal to put the money in the hands of the locals who know their community best might be the best approach.
Going back to the emergency family shelters, it was said at the time the goal is to keep them through the winter, but I guess if you were able to tour them right before this all happened, say the original families that were put in these shelters, are they still there? Have they been able to move on, or families working their way up and out, or just kind of what is the status of?
Again, I might ask, let's see, Chris Winters if he could comment on this, but we have seen that there's been some movement, right? There've been some new families coming in, families who have exited the program, and I should add as well, with our proposal, we're going to keep the family shelters open, and now the other emergency shelters open during this period after April 1 as well. So that's in addition to this money going to municipalities. Commissioner Winters.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. There has been quite a few families served over the last few months in those family shelters. We've seen turnover in those shelters as people families moved on to other more permanent housing situations. So we have been able to help quite a number of families, and as the Governor stated, it gives us an opportunity to really connect, to bring services and supports on site, to help folks secure employment and secure other services that they might need to get back on their feet. And so we would see this model of housing folks with services connected as the most successful model when it comes to addressing unsheltered homelessness.
I've also been very pleased, I think I've said this before, but it's worth saying again, with Waterbury. Waterbury was somewhat resistant, as you might remember, in setting up this family shelter, but we convinced them otherwise, opened it up, and they've been a big part of the success. They've had community members that have come in to help out, in fact, enough so that they would like to run it themselves in the next year, as I recall. Is that correct, Commissioner?
Absolutely, Governor. I wouldn't put Waterbury fully on the hook yet. We're engaged in some conversation with them, but they have expressed that interest to use it for town purposes through the summer. and then continue to operate it perhaps by the town in the winter months as a shelter, because the community has really rallied around the families that are there. We see a whole bunch of folks volunteering their services and donating items to the families who are staying there. We're really excited for how Waterbury has responded there, as well as Williston. We really want to thank again those communities for embracing these shelters at a time of need.
Yeah, I don't want to leave out Williston because right from the beginning, they were involved. And in fact, they were bringing gift cards in, bringing items in, really involved in the process. So again, both of those communities deserve a lot of credit.
At this point, does the state plan to keep those two shelters open past April 1st?
We would keep them open throughout that time period, just as though we're running right now. Whatever we're doing right now, we're going to continue it.
For how long?
Until that, at least until that, the end of the fiscal year.
More on tariffs, Governor. We've heard that Bar Hill is claiming their liquor label for Canada was rejected due to tariffs. Do you have an update on that, and maybe Secretary Burley as well?
Yeah, again, it's the emotions are running high on both sides of the border, which is unfortunate. These are our friends to the north, but again, I know that there are some, and I spoke directly with Premier Ford and as well as Premier Houston from Nova Scotia. And, you know, it's creating this divide, and they're taking even product off their shelves because they don't want it there anymore. The U.S. is getting a bad rap in some respects out of the actions out of Washington. So, Secretary Gurley, do you want to add anything more?
As the governor mentioned, you know, he hit on the emotional part. I mean, the tariffs aren't requiring these products to come off the shelves. It's a decision that's being made by the leadership, and so the challenge is that Caledonia Spirits labeling, as you may have heard, was specifically designed to meet Canada's and Quebec's specific regulations. So meaning their bottles can't easily be repurposed for other markets. So they and other Vermont producers who, you know, have prepared alcohol to be sold in Canada are left with this alcohol that can't just be sold here. It's not an easy fix. It costs money. It takes investment. So what we're doing here is, you know, we've reached out to Caledonia Spirits. The owner's traveling right now, so we have a meeting later in the week, but we've also reached out to the Consul General and Canada's Consul General in Boston. We have a very strong relationship there, and we've basically our goal is to try to find out, you know, what does Premier Legault need to see from us to try to get Vermont products back on the shelves. As I mentioned, this is not, you know, because of the tariff specifically, it's not, again, that the tariff prevents us from having the alcohol there. This is because of a decision made because, you know, people are angry, and so we really value our relationship, and we want to keep, you know, products here on the shelves, and we're going to ask them to do the same. So hopefully we can try to resolve this in a really, you know, friendly manner.
I guess while I've got you, has there been any other impact with other exports or imports when it comes to alcohol, and will the consumers here feel any impact? I think you may have mentioned that already.
Yeah, I mean, it would impact other producers of alcohol or people trying to sell alcohol there. I haven't necessarily heard of other products outside of alcohol, but I can imagine that it can happen easily, and we're prepared for that. But again, I hope, you know, we have really strong relationships, especially, you know, here close with Quebec, and you know, I hope that they will at least consider to keep Vermont products on the shelves. So we'll keep working. We'll keep working for Vermonters and as well as keeping those Quebec products here, Canadian products here on the shelf. So.
Final question from me in terms of tariffs, just in terms of the state's benefit financially when it comes to international sale. Is there any benefit? Is there anything you can touch on there? How much the state benefits financially from those sorts of things?
When you say the state's benefit, are you talking about like on the tariff itself?
I think just in general, how much money is in turn brought back to the state by partnering with Canada when it comes to selling alcohol there.
Oh, you know what, Commissioner Knight's on, she may know that specific. I don't know, I don't have that level of detail. If she doesn't, we can maybe get something to you. But Commissioner Knight, is that something that you know? Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, that wasn't very clear. It came from Ike, I apologize.
Okay.
How much does the state benefit financially from international sales?
Yeah, so specific to alcohol, how much does Vermont benefit from the sale of alcohol to the Canadian market? Do we know those numbers?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand the question. How much do we benefit when we sell international products at 802 Spirit stores? Is that what you're asking?
I think it's alcohol that's produced or sold from, it's exported from Vermont into the Canadian market. Do we know what the benefit to Vermont is in terms of the income that it generates here? We can get it, but I don't know if you have it.
No, and I can follow up with you. There are not many Vermont alcohol beverage manufacturers that are exporting to Canada. If that's your question, I can get you information on that.
Yeah, we can do that.
There
We
can follow up. That are exporting their product to Canada.
Yeah, we can get that. All right, thanks. I just didn't know if you had it off the top of your head. Thank you.
Sorry for derailing.
Oh, it's all fine. It's good to see how quick our brain will work. Thank you.
Just for the record, I got thrown under the bus.
It was not ill intent.
Governor, you alluded to the faster pace the Senate is taking on education. I guess it was right before town meeting, Senator Bongartz put out his proposed maps, which I understand are preliminary, in essence, 9 regional districts. Did you or your team have thoughts on that? And is 9 a reasonable number in your mind?
Yeah, as I've said before, we're not fixated on 5. We're not welded to 5. If they come up with another proposal, we'd be happy to take a look. The 9 seems reasonable. So we're flexible in that regard. Just getting back to the tariff for just a minute, I just want everyone, this won't be instantaneous either. Some of the tariffs that the money goes back to Washington, we don't see any of it. But it isn't, for steel and aluminum and so forth, we may not, if it was prolonged, we might see an increase, weeks, months down the road in terms of cost pressures at that point when they start coming in terms of cans and maybe products, other products and manufactured buildings and things, the siding, things like that. But at this point, I don't think it will be instantaneous. But a week in Washington politics these days is like a lifetime. So things can change next week, and this could all be over. Who knows? Let's hope so.
In the meantime, Representative Jed Lipsky, who's in the timber business, said that there is virtually no market now for the spruce that is harvested in Vermont because all the mills are in Canada. Is the state aware of that, and are there domestic options there for our timber industry?
Yeah, we don't have as many mills as we once did, obviously. I'm not sure if there's any other mills in New Hampshire. Northern New Hampshire did have mills. Maine did have mills. I'm just not sure whether they're available or not at this point. We have some small mills that can be utilized, but not to the degree that Representative Lipsky is talking about.
I think it's a lighthearted one to end it for me. We saw a Facebook post from the Barrytown Fire Department about a shotgun raffle.
Yes.
Are you the big winner?
I was the big winner. I've been part of that, donating money to the Barrytown Fire Department for probably 20 years on this one particular raffle. So I guess, eventually you get lucky enough to win. So it was my turn.
What kind of shotgun?
It's a Mossberg, 12 gauge is a turkey gun.
Do you do that often?
No, not anymore. I don't do anything much anymore. But I do have a gun safe full of guns. I used to like to bird hunt a lot. I had a bird dog, and so maybe someday I'll get back to that. And now I'll have a shotgun to do it.
Bird dog and race cars.
Yeah. All right, thank you all very much.